What's up, everybody? I am Wyatt, and welcome to Cinema Trip Reviews. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on Instagram and Twitter at Cinema Trip Reviews. Also, wherever you get your podcasts, pretty much available everywhere. Drop in and leave us a good review. Today on the show, I'm going to be talking about Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, as it's subtitled. This is the first time I have ever seen this movie. This was from 2014. This is a critically acclaimed film from that time. In 2014, 2015, this movie was pretty much all everybody was talking about. And I mean, every year I feel like you get one of those movies because of the Oscars and because it goes in and sweeps a bunch of awards. Most recently with like Everything Everywhere All at Once, that movie dominated everything. You were seeing it everywhere. Everybody was talking about it pretty much in 2014, 2015. That's what was happening with this movie. I do remember seeing the trailer for it. I wasn't super interested in it at the time. I mean, watching the trailer, it doesn't really show you too much or really explain what the course of the movie is or what it really is about, really. So, I mean, even before I watched the movie here, I watched the trailer again, and I was, I feel like it piqued my interest more now that I'm older than whenever it originally came out. I decided to go and actually give it a full watch here, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised. Now, this movie was directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. If not, forgive me, I am sorry. This movie is starring Michael Keaton as Regan Thompson, Edward Norton as Mike Shiner. You got Emma Stone in here, Amy Ryan, Zach Galifianakis, Naomi Watts, Andrea Riseborough, and Lindsay Duncan in this. Those are really the main players of the movie itself. Now, the main plot of the movie is you follow Regan Thompson, played by Michael Keaton's character, who is like a washed-up actor, and he is trying to rejuvenate his career and really make himself as like an artist or an actual actor, a trained actor. He wants to be recognized for his talent, not just being the Birdman, as, the title of the movie, and that was his character in the superhero movies, was Birdman. But the way he's trying to rejuvenate his career is he's taking this old play and he's trying to put it on Broadway, and he's going to be the star. He's writing it, he rewrote it, he directed it, and he's also going to be starring in it. And this is going to be his way for people to find out that he's not just an entertainer out there. He's an actual actor, and he can, he wants people to see his craft. He wants people to see that he can make it as an actor. He doesn't want to just rely on being that guy in the superhero movies all those years ago. And this movie is extremely interesting, and it's extremely unique because of the way it's shot. I remember hearing about this at the time, but it really threw me for a loop because I forgot about it until I watched it, and I was like, oh, wow, I'm wondering how this is going to work. Now, this movie is shot to make it seem like it is one huge entire long take going on for 2 hours. This movie is 2 hours long. And I believe there's only about 16 or 15 cuts throughout the whole thing that you can kind of tell that it's going into a new scene, and they actually spliced it here. But as you're watching through the movie, everything goes in very seamlessly. And it's shot very unique as well because it's kind of like I wouldn't say a documentary, but it's kind of like a mockumentary type style. Like if you watch like The Office or something, where you can actually are following the characters around, and it's very candid. It's like a candid camera type movie in a way, because it's not like these cinematic shots or anything. Like the camera's constantly following these characters as they're moving along the, these different hallways or going to the stage, because this whole movie takes place pretty much in this theater where they're, running the play, and it takes place over the course of like the last three like preview nights before the opening night of the Broadway show. And everything that can go wrong will go wrong through the course of this movie, as you come to find out, from one of the lead actors, getting a fucking light dropped on his head and he has to leave production. Was it an accident? I don't know. And then you have to recast that actor. And who do you bring in? You bring in Edward Norton, who causes a whole bunch of, mischief and antics because of what kind of actor he is. And what I really enjoy about this is you see some kind of parallels between the actor who's playing the part and the character that they're playing. Like Michael Keaton's character, who, coincidentally enough, the last movie that he did in like the superhero movies that he did was in 1992, which coincidentally is when Batman Returns came out. So there's some parallels between these characters, because Michael Keaton, at the time, this movie is really what rejuvenated his career. For a good while, you weren't really hearing much of Michael Keaton for a while. I mean, he was in some movies here and there after Batman Returns and in between all that time. But he wasn't, this movie is really what kind of escalated him back on top of superstardom. And I mean, you've seen him in a bunch of stuff since then. But this movie is really what kind of rejuvenated his career and, catapulted him up there. He won a bunch of awards for it. He was nominated for a bunch of awards for it. He got a lot of great recognition for this. And I mean, you see some parallels between that and also between like Edward Norton and his character. His character is kind of like full of himself. He's trying to make some like script changes. He thinks his decisions are always right. He wants he's taking credit for things that he didn't actually do. And some of these things, if you read about Edward Norton and some of his antics on some of his old movies or some of the rumors about how he acts and treats people on set at some of these movies, you hear about it a lot with that Hulk movie that he was in for Marvel back in the day here. So, I mean, his character kind of mirrors what was happening with him and a lot of these rumors that were happening with him. So, I mean, there's some similarities between some of these characters, and a lot of like the main characters were actually in superhero movies, which is pretty interesting enough. Now, this movie was very meticulously planned because with it making it seem like it is all one shot through the course of the movie, you have to make sure that script is as tight as possible going into filming because you're not going to have room for, taking out certain scenes or replacing certain scenes or anything like that. What you see is what you get pretty much. But apparently this movie took about 2 months to complete entirely. It took 2 weeks to edit after it was completed, which doesn't seem like a lot of time, but because uniquely enough, like everything else, this movie was shot in sequence. It was filmed entirely in order, so they didn't really have to do a ton of editing at the end of everything. Pretty much everything that was on the script was what you got on film, and pretty much you go into the editing. You don't have to do too much other than add some special effects in here or there. Boom, you're done. You got a movie. So, I mean, 2 months to film this and then 2 weeks to edit, that's not a lot at all. And then it comes out as amazing as it is and how tightly written that script was. And I mean, the whole movie was great overall. I mean, I just want to get that out there. I had a really good time because I didn't know what to expect at all. I mean, after watching the trailer, like I mentioned, I didn't really know what was going on other than like the brief description is about as like an aging actor who's trying to, get himself big again. The trailer doesn't really show you a lot of that kind of stuff. It's very, it reminds you like kind of like an A24 type, or an art house type trailer. You're not getting a lot of information out of it, which I really like in this day and age. I've complained about it on other videos before. Trailers give way too much away of movies nowadays. So it's kind of refreshing to watch a trailer like this, not really know what it's about, and then going into it. And it kind of, I wouldn't say blew my socks off by any means, but it was a very good movie. I don't think I'm going to go back and rewatch it again unless like my fiance wants to watch it or something. It's not something I would really add to my collection and view on multiple viewings. I feel like I really got what I wanted out of this movie, and it was a very good watch upon the first time. Now, because of the movie being filmed in like not only sequential order, but because this movie is filmed like it is one long take with very minimal cuts, you have extremely long takes. And apparently they were fitting like 15 pages of dialogue in between like each take itself. So, I mean, a lot of these actors really had to try to kind of treat it like a Broadway play or a Broadway musical and memorize all these lines and go through all their blocking, where they need to be, what they are doing at that point in time in the scene. So, I mean, hats off to everybody that was in this movie that was able to, do not only a great, amazing acting job, but to go through and do everything else through these extremely long takes. Because, man, I feel like that would be extremely hard. And to do it in 2 months, that's crazy to me. I feel like that's an extremely short amount of time to go through a 2-hour movie and have it blocked and memorized and being able to kind of move scenes and transition scenes the way you want it to. So, I mean, it's very unique. I personally have never seen anything like it. Now, I know there's some other movies out there or TV shows that have since after this kind of went and tried to do their same thing with like huge one take shots or, doing something in the vein of this sort of thing. But I've never seen it on this scale before. And it was very impressive. It was really impressive. It helped with the movie. And I feel like the way that the story went and everything that was involved, I feel like that helped the movie in a way. Because I feel like if you go into a movie not knowing what it's about and you know that, okay, it's gonna seem like it is one long take, there's no cuts or anything, I feel like the first impression is, okay, that doesn't sound like it would make for a very exciting movie, really. Because I feel like you need some kind of, you need to break some of the monotony. You need to go have some different set pieces or things like that. But the way things kind of change so much, and you're following this character, and then it goes right into somewhere else, and you're following another character, everything kind of blends and goes together so seamlessly that you don't really mind. You're following these. You're not just following Michael Keaton's character the entire movie. You get to follow like Edward Norton's character for a little bit, or Michael Keaton's daughter, played by Emma Stone in the movie. You get to follow her for a little bit and see what's going on with her. Now, my only real like nitpick I have about this movie, and this is, a very tiny nitpick, is some of the characters you're following for maybe a majority of the movie, they kind of disappear by the end. Edward Norton, who you see for a majority of the movie, he kind of takes a backseat and disappears for that third act. You really don't see much of him at all in that third act. And especially with Naomi Watts' character, who you see probably more so in that first half, really disappears in that back half of the movie. Where you think that maybe she was going to have more of a presence or more of a role, she disappears as well. And you kind of go through like different antagonists in a way. Maybe that's the reason why they do it. Because at the very beginning, like I mentioned, you have the actor who the light fell on his head, and they're all worried like, oh, they're gonna sue the production and everything. This is gonna cause a lot of issues. But then you have like Edward Norton's character, who you follow for like a majority of the movie with Michael Keaton and everybody else, who he's very like egotistical. He feels like he knows best of everything. He's very kind of a pompous asshole through a majority of the movie. So he's kind of like an antagonist through the thing as well. He's causing some trouble with the production and everything. But in like the third act, you have the critic for like the New York Times, played by like Lindsay Duncan. She hates Michael Keaton's character because she feels like he's phony, because he spent all these years like as a comic book actor behind this suit. She feels that he's an entertainer. He's not an actor. He's not an artist at heart. So right out the gate, she's like, I'm going to destroy your production. I'm going to give it a terrible review, and there's really not anything you could do about it. I don't like you. And she doesn't know anything about it. She hasn't seen it. And she immediately tells him like, yeah, I'm just going to rip your play apart. I'm going to destroy it. And then he just kind of goes off on her for a little bit. And you think that's going to have some kind of repercussions, but she kind of disappears as well. You only get to see her maybe one other time at the end of the movie. It kind of bounces back and forth between like these little antagonists through the movie while all these other issues are going on, not just within the play, but within Michael Keaton's life as well. I mean, he has a daughter, an ex-drug addict daughter who's just out of rehab. He thinks that she's like relapsing, but also he realizes he hasn't been the best father to her whole life. He realizes he's been a shitty father because he's always been away like making movies and doing other stuff. So he has that on his mind. He has everything that's going on with the show because he's funding it, he's directing it, he helped write it, and he has to deal with everything that's going on production-wise is going wrong. And I mean, there's other issues that happen throughout. Like, of course, one of the big set pieces of the movie that everybody gets to laugh at is he ends up getting locked out. He goes out for a smoke and he ends up getting locked out of the building while the show's going on, and he has to get back in, but he's not dressed fully. He's in his underwear and a robe, but the robe gets stuck in a door, so he has to run around Times Square in New York in his undies, and they're not just boxers or anything, they're tighty whities, and he's running around and everybody's filming him, putting him on the internet. You know how it is. But that's a pretty hilarious part of the movie. I wouldn't say this movie is very funny at all, and I remember a lot of people saying like it's kind of like a dark comedy and there's some comedy sprinkled throughout. I didn't really find this movie funny at all. I mean, other than like maybe a couple different places, but overall it's very much a drama that you're following these characters. A lot of people had the impression it was like a superhero type movie whenever it originally came out, I remember, and boy, they were dead wrong, because it's more so about a production on Broadway than anything, and following Michael Keaton's kind of downward spiral, not just within his career, but kind of mentally as well. I mean, throughout the whole movie, this is a part I haven't mentioned, throughout the whole movie, he has this voice in his head, and it's telling him pretty much the truth of what he needs to do, but he doesn't want to listen to it. But you find out this voice that he's hearing in his head is Birdman. It's this superhero that he played in these movies. And about halfway through the movie, that's when you really start seeing Birdman in like mirrors or walking behind him or flying behind him, even on that street the street scene that you see in like all the trailers and everything. But it's definitely a very interesting take on everything, on how they did it and how it was written. He ends up having these conversations with Birdman, and then it goes, and he kind of snaps out of it, and he's somewhere else. Like, he ends up snapping out of it, and he's on top of a building, and everybody down below thinks he's going to jump all of a sudden. He's like, oh, okay, I'm not going to jump. And he's just kind of spaced out. He's in his own head. I think he's talking to Birdman. But then it kind of transitions and he's like, you know what? I can fly. And he jumps off a building and he's flying now. And I don't know. It definitely did a good job of averting my expectations in some of these things, because as he's doing some of these things that aren't humanly possible, as like Birdman, really, as he thinks he's this Birdman character, you think things are really happening in real life that are going to be, going to have bad consequences. Like when he jumps off that building and he's like, I'm going to fly, and he jumps off. I really thought he was just going to fall and hit a car, or he's going to fall to the street and he's going to break a ton of bones and they were going to take him to the hospital. Or whenever Birdman's flying, he's flying down the street and he's flying and he goes back to the Broadway show, I thought it was going to just cut to him running down the street acting like he was flying, and he was just kind of going to be in his own head, not realizing what he was going to do. And I feel like that would have been some comedy to add to the movie. But I feel like maybe it would have been too much, and it wouldn't have worked for the ending that the way it is, as far as leaving it kind of ambiguous a little bit and letting you think about your own interpretation of the ending. So maybe if they would have done something like that, it would have kind of ruined how they wanted the ending to be perceived a little bit. So that makes kind of sense. But that's just what I thought in the time. And there was a couple different points throughout the movie I thought something was going to happen, and then I went and kind of reverted my expectations and, took a right turn instead of the left turn I was expecting. But there was one real thing I did predict right about halfway through the movie. And spoiler alert for anybody that hasn't seen this movie, I'm going to go into some spoilers here. Halfway through the movie, you are getting to see some of the play when they're doing some of these test shows for the audience before opening night. And they keep showing the final scene of this play, and it's Michael Keaton's character catching his wife in bed, or his girlfriend in bed with somebody else, which is played by Edward Norton. And he goes through this whole thing, how he's upset, and you find out that she didn't love him anymore and everything. So at the end, he decides to kill himself. He blows his brains out, and that's it. And you move on, and then, go to the next scene or whatever. As soon as that happened, I immediately knew he's going to end up killing himself at the end of this movie. And I was kind of right, kind of wrong about it, because at the end of the movie, you see he's in his dressing room. He pulls out the real gun. You see he pulls out the clip. There's bullets in it. He's going down. They're like, all right, got to attach your blood squibs or whatever. He's like, nope, forget about it. Don't worry about it. And you're like, okay, he's going to go out and shoot himself. He goes out, goes through everything, and he acts the scene out like he's never acted before. It's way better than you see I believe you see it twice before. He's doing a phenomenal job in the scene, so much so that the critic even gets up and walks out of the theater. Like, she's kind of even mad that he proved her wrong as far as being a great actor. And at the very end of that scene, he pulls that gun out and shoots himself, and it goes to black. And, I was like, shit, I was right. One thing in this movie I actually did predict successfully. Sure enough, it goes to the hospital. He wakes up, and he apparently missed and blew his nose off, so they have to give him a new nose. And you find out that he is kind of created a new kind of art form as far as acting. It's like realism acting. So instead of pretending he's shooting himself, he actually shot himself. And then, it's blowing everybody's socks off. The critic that told him she was going to destroy his show gave him pretty much a glowing review of it, pretty much giving him credit for, making this new kind of acting form or art form, I guess. And everything kind of seems too good. Everything's happening. He's back on top. He's going viral. His daughter started a Twitter page for him that's blown up. Everybody's talking about him. And it seems like he finally got what he wanted. And it was because of what he did. And this is where it kind of is a little ambiguous. Not just a little. This movie is definitely ambiguous at the ending. because he gets up, but because if he blew his nose off, he has like this big like like white, mask of bandages on, and it looks kind of like the Birdman mask a little bit. He goes into the bathroom and he takes it off, and he has a new nose, and he looks completely different. I was like, holy shit, is that actually Michael Keaton? It didn't look like him at all. But he like looks in the mirror and he sees Birdman there, and he goes out, he opens up the window, and he stands on the ledge there just looking out at the street and everything. And then you cut to his daughter, Emma Stone, walking in, and she's looking for him, and she can't find him anywhere. And she looks out the window, like, horrified, and then she looks up, and she starts smiling, and, seems like she's in a good mood. So it leaves it very ambiguous. Like, did he actually kill himself? Or is he actually flying? Did he turn into Birdman? Is he actually flying? I don't think that he's actually flying, because everything you've seen before doesn't prove that he has powers of any sort at all. I mean, it wants to make you think like he may have. Like, earlier in the movie, he's trashing his office, like whipping things around, and you think he's using like telekinesis or something, using his powers. But as soon as somebody sees him doing it, he's actually throwing it. So what he thinks he's doing isn't actually what's happening in real life. Just like when he's flying down the streets, like I mentioned before, he just shows up at the Broadway place in a taxi. He doesn't pay the taxi driver, though. Everything is not what it seems as far as this movie. I do think that he killed himself at the very end of the movie, whether it was him shooting himself on stage and that's where he died there, and maybe the rest of it is kind of like a dream, or like him in like a coma or something. Or maybe he actually killed himself in the hospital where he jumped out the window. Who knows? But I think my interpretation of Emma Stone's character at the end, how she seems happy, is I feel like she finally sees that it worked for him. She sees all the recognition that he's getting now, whether like through the internet, blowing up on social media, through the glowing review by the critic, through everything. He finally made his name big again, not just for a superhero movie. He actually got his name out there, and he's known for being, a decent actor and doing something new and creating and perfecting his craft a little bit. So I feel like it's a little bit of both. Like, he did kill himself, but it's also, she's very happy that he was able to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish before he died. So, I mean, I don't know. Apparently, the ending of this movie came to the director in a dream, which makes a lot of sense, because the ending of the movie seems very dreamlike. It seems like it's a little too good to be true at the very end. There's so much stuff that's going on all at once that's too good, wherein the whole rest of the movie is just one bad thing after another. Oh, you think something's been resolved? Nope, something bad else has happened now. So at the very end of the movie, it's just one thing after another. Oh, this has happened, that's good. This has happened, that's good. This has happened. So it seems like it's all a little too good to be true. It seems a little very dreamlike. So it kind of makes sense in a way. I mean, I feel like everybody's going to kind of have their own interpretation and take out something different from this movie for themselves. And I think that's what makes it great. And I feel like that's what makes movies great in general. I mentioned that before in reviews. But every single performance in this movie is fantastic, top to bottom. Even some of the people that kind of disappear, like Naomi Watts, she's a small part in this movie, but she's amazing. And I mean, Naomi Watts, she's pretty much amazing everything she does, but she's amazing in this movie as well. And even Andrea Riseborough, who plays Laura, she's not in it too much, but she does a perfect job in it as well. She's damn good in it. Now, speaking of damn good, I'm going to go into the score for a second. This movie is soundtracked by like jazz drums and jazz music in general. And I'm not a huge fan of jazz, but with the way that it's structured and the way that I mentioned that everything kind of keeps escalating and some of these conversations are escalating, it does an amazing job of kind of going through the beats of these conversations and carrying these conversations or carrying these scenes with these kind of drum compositions. Now, I've seen some like YouTube videos of like drummers taking like scenes from TV shows or movies and kind of add jazz drums or something to it to kind of spice up and give the conversation a little flavor a little bit. But you get that through this whole movie, and it's not just the same thing every time. It changes up, and it gives each conversation its own little uniqueness in a way. And it's just it's kind of like the cherry on top of, and I can't stress this enough, a unique movie. I haven't seen anything like it previously, and I don't know when I'm going to see anything like this again. You really don't see too many movies that are shot, like a one-take structure or anything like that. Or not just that, but, but scored by like jazz drums or anything. But yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I feel like everybody's going to kind of take something different out of it. Like I mentioned before, everybody's going to have their own interpretation of it. It has a lot of, there's some decent heavy subject matter and not super heavy, but there's definitely some dramatic subject matter that is relatable for some audiences, I feel like, but it doesn't like overindulge in the drama at all. It doesn't go over dramatic at any point. It was perfectly written. It was perfectly directed. There was a reason that it won the awards it did. I mean, as far as Oscars, it got, Best Picture. It got Best Achievement in Directing, Best Writing Original Screenplay, and you also got Best Achievement in Cinematography. And that's a lot of the things I mentioned they got awards for right there. And what's interesting about this movie, watching it now, is there's a couple messages in it that ring true, I feel like, louder now than it did at the time because of the state of superhero movies in general. Because there's a couple scenes in this where they kind of dive into maybe some of the director's thoughts on superheroes movies. And this was in 2014, 2015. Superhero movies are kind of one note. Everybody goes to see them for these huge action set pieces and explosions and characters fighting and everything. Nobody's really going there for the actor or going there for, the story itself, this hard-hitting story that's going to pull at your heartstrings or anything like that. Nobody's going to see an amazing acting performance by one of the leads or anything like that. And talking about that in 2015 is very early because that's really like the height of superhero movies, I feel like, as far as like the MCU and everything. So I feel like that rings true even more now because everybody's kind of screaming about like superhero fatigue, and everybody was kind of diving in on Quentin Tarantino when he said the same exact thing in a couple of interviews when he was promoting his book. So I feel like that's really in a lot of people's minds is superhero movies are great. There's not a lot of substance to them, though. And, I mean, it makes sense, though, because I love some of these actors in these movies, in these superhero movies, but I'm not going there to see an amazing performance out of them or anything like that. I'm not expecting anything like that going into a superhero movie. But, yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough, especially to people who hasn't seen it. You definitely need to see it at least once just to kind of appreciate everything that went into making this film. Just the work that took to crafting that script and not only that, but blocking and trying to plan everything out, how you're going to film it and then put it all together. It's definitely a feat of directing that I got to give Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu some props for. But yeah, it was a great film. Out of a buy it, rent it, miss it, I would say rent it. This is one I'm not going to add to my collection or anything like that, but if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, watching it at least once. Go out and rent it. It is on HBO Max. I watch it on HBO Max. But yeah, that is a review for this week. If you haven't already, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on Instagram and Twitter at Cinema Trip Reviews. Also, go check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Pretty much available anywhere. Drop in and leave us a good review there. And we'll see everybody next week.